I think we may start. Okay.
Okay.
Buenas tardes a todos. De nuevo, soy consciente de que no habéis tenido ni hemos tenido mucho tiempo para comer. Más de uno ha comido en el despacho, pero bueno, como decía antes, vale la pena con la información y con todas las sugerencias que estamos recibiendo. Pues iniciamos la sesión de tarde, centrada en buenas prácticas, centradas en las acciones y las políticas desde lo local, porque también son políticas en última instancia. Y en primer lugar tenemos como panelista a Rob Clarke. Él es una de las almas mater de la experiencia casi por excelencia de freno a las políticas, de freno a los procesos de despoblación. Él es el responsable de políticas en las Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Ahora nos dirá exactamente qué es esto, que yo creo que es un aspecto a tener muy en cuenta y de la que nuestros responsables políticos yo creo que deben de tomar buena nota. Él es especialista en políticas europeas y ha sido el responsable y líder en la aplicación de diferentes ámbitos de las políticas públicas, de políticas europeas, y ha desarrollado una labor muy intensa y muy eficaz, movilizando y dinamizando a los actores locales, a los stakeholders, y creando redes de cooperación que tienen como resultado lo que nos va a comentar. Y sin más, pues adelante Rob, y muchas gracias por tu participación y bienvenido. Adelante.
Okay, thank you very much, Javier. I would say, first of all, a very thank you for inviting me along to this session. What I intend to do today is give you a wee history, a small history about development and addressing depopulation in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. So, first of all, I will tell you a little bit about the Highlands and Islands, just to give you some context. I'll give you a brief history of our development journey. Where we've come from, why we're here, what was the origin of our being set up. And that brings us up to the present day. I'll tell you a little bit about current policy, current activity, current interventions, and I'll talk a little bit about what the future holds and what our response is potentially going to be, and then I will draw one or two conclusions from that. So just for those of you who are not aware of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland and where we are, you'll see the green area on the map there is the Highlands and Islands. It covers about half the land area of Scotland, but it only has 8% of the population. So it has a population density of around about 12 people per square kilometre, very sparsely populated. Challenges in the region, characteristics of the region, if you like. I mentioned the sparsity of population, and that manifests itself in very small and very dispersed settlements. We only have one city of about 70,000 people, a number of small towns, and many, many small settlements. We have a very complex geography. We have 94 inhabited islands down, as you see, down the west coast, and the islands to the north. That obviously has issues for connectivity, particularly physical connectivity. The mainland is mountainous, making communication difficult as well. Also making investment in any kind of infrastructure challenging and potentially expensive. The region is incredibly rural, although, as I will come on to say, it's maybe not typical in terms of rural economy. It's quite a broad-based rural economy. Having said that, some areas of the region are fragile in terms of both their economy and their social fabric. And across the whole region, we have a lower than average levels of income. So incomes in the Highlands and Islands are lower than Scotland as a whole. But alongside that, the cost of living is higher than elsewhere in Scotland and in the UK. And that's largely a product of transport costs, distances, and in some cases lack of public transport, and fuel issues. So older housing stock, not particularly efficient from a heating point of view, oil heating as opposed to gas, etc., increases those costs. So it's challenging in a number of ways. Not as challenging now as it was. I'm going to take you back in time now, not as far back as we went in the United States before lunch. I'm only going to go back about 50 years. And 50 years ago, the Highlands and Islands was a region where the population was in constant decline. You'll see that line dipping down to around the mid-1960s. At that point, the population was in almost terminal decline. The economy was stagnant. It was based on traditional rural industries. The prevailing view was to be successful and to make anything of your life, you had to leave. And the region was really struggling, very narrow-based economy, large infrastructure gaps, very little investment in the region. So I suppose we characterize that as a crisis that demanded a response. And the government at the time saw that as a crisis and made its response, which was the creation of the agency that I work for, Highlands and Islands Enterprise. It was called the Highlands and Islands Development Board back in 1965. And that organization was established with a remit which at the time was no more detailed than go out and do what you think needs to be done to develop the region, to develop the economy, to develop communities, and really get the region back on its feet and back on a positive trajectory. So we were established in 1965. Our remit, uniquely at that time and still quite unusual today, was very broad. So it encompasses a business support and an economic development remit. But although we're called an economic development agency, we also have a community support remit. So we work with communities as well. And we have responsibility for either investing in enabling infrastructure, or where we don't have that remit, influencing others to make those investments. So you've seen on the population graph, it did start to increase from the mid-1960s. I'd like to think that all of that was down to my organization and its work. I think some of it was down to my organization and its work, but there were other factors involved as well. I think a significant factor, and I'm flagging this up simply from a scale issue, there was local government reform in 1975, and from that point there have been, and currently there are in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, which from scale point of view is the size of Belgium, there are seven local authorities. So local authorities are we don't really have small municipalities with any degree of responsibility. So the local authorities is the level of local government that delivers services and invests in communities. So there are just 7 separate local authorities in the Highlands and Islands. So that's quite a large scale compared to elsewhere in Europe. But I think it does bring some advantages. The region has also benefited over the years from some specific industry developments. The exploitation of North Sea oil is an obvious one, which brought different opportunities to the region, demanded different skills in terms of engineering, in terms of fabrication, in terms of some industrial skills, moving away from that traditional rural economy. And when we get to the present day, those skills embedded in the region have been very helpful in us exploiting renewable energy opportunities over recent years. And again, these developments were supported by Highlands and Islands Enterprise and its predecessor, either through financial support, identifying opportunities, helping businesses to take opportunities, helping them to develop the skills they needed to take the opportunities. And that's happened in a number of sectors. So another good example is the aquaculture sector. So Scotland currently is, I think, the 3rd largest producer of farmed salmon in the world. That is an industry that did not exist 50 years ago. It was identified as an opportunity by my organisation, and we worked very hard to develop that sector. And now it's a sector that employs directly about 1,500 people and several thousand people in the downstream supply chains developed from didn't exist 50 years ago. We've seen significant developments in transport infrastructure. So although we still have some single track roads around the region, they are few and far between. So that brought parts of the region closer to each other and also closer to the main population centres in Scotland and the UK. Our number of islands has necessitated ferry crossings. So again, there has been investment in port facilities, ferry crossings, and we have a network of airports across the region that link those remote parts of the region to population centres. And I think interestingly in that as well, it's not just the establishment of the infrastructure, it's a recognition that those distances and those transport modes have additional costs for people. So there is support currently from government to subsidise, to support the cost of those transports. So for example, people who live on islands can access preferential rates on air routes. Ferry fares are calculated so that they're actually equivalent to what driving that distance would be. It's called road equivalent tariff, so it reduces costs for those crossings. So that has really brought remote parts of the region much closer to each other and population centres. And latterly, significant investment in digital infrastructure, starting off with telephone infrastructure and subsequently into superfast broadband, and I'll talk a little more about that shortly. So it has been an interesting journey. It has been considerable successes, I think, certainly in terms of the population, which has now recovered to about 340,000 up until current number, which is about 480,000. we now have an economy which is relatively broad-based, isn't a typical rural economy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So I think that's a little history lesson. I really want to talk more about the present day and our present day situation and have a look at the future. So I think it's important to stress that although we are looking at a region of Scotland here, the Scottish government recognises the different issues in different parts of Scotland. Its economic strategy focuses now, and this wasn't always the case, but it focuses now equally on economic development and tackling inequality, and that's geographic inequality and inclusion as well as individual. So they're very clearly of the view that Scotland's economy needs to grow, but that growth needs to be shared by everybody across the whole of Scotland, even the most remote parts of the country. And you can see there the focus on those key drivers of growth around investment, innovation, inclusive growth, very important, and internationalization. So we are an economic development agency of government. We are now one of 3. We were one of 2 government economic development agencies until April of this year. But interestingly, a new agency in the south of Scotland was established in April this year in recognition of the particular economic and social circumstances in the south of Scotland. So we now have 3 economic development agencies in Scotland. And I guess as the one for the north of Scotland, our role is to really translate that national strategy into something that has regional relevance and is going to deliver in the places and the communities and the locations that we operate in. And I guess you can look at our activities in 3 ways, I guess. So we have a clear focus around supporting businesses, a very important focus around supporting communities, the rationale being that successful businesses don't grow from dying communities, and vibrant communities do not exist without businesses that provide job opportunities, etc., etc. And wrapped around all of that are the kind of the enablers, if you like, or the conditions for growth, and that's some of the infrastructure that I've talked about: transport, digital infrastructure, housing, social care, childcare, academic infrastructure. I'll talk about a little bit, is extremely important. So those 3 aspects of our role really come together and allow us to be really effective in place-based development. I think it's worth emphasizing as well our structure. So we have an area-based structure, and the real benefit of this is that we have a presence across the whole of the region. So each of the different colors there is a separate area team. They're rooted in their community. They know their area really well. They know the businesses, they know the communities. They're able to collaborate very effectively with local partners in their own area. And I think that the fact that we're rooted in those communities is a real strength in terms of our ability to support businesses and communities. So a little bit how we support, and I guess you may be thinking, okay, so what's this got to do with specifically around addressing depopulation and such like? I guess it's probably not a million miles away from the earlier example from the US in terms of build it and they will come. I suppose our view has been very much that rather than offering incentives for people to move to the area, we need to ensure that the region is able to offer opportunity, is able to satisfy the aspirations of people who wish to be there, either those who are from the region or those who wish to move to the region. So in that sense, it's looking at, I suppose you could say it's looking at the four capitals almost. It's looking at that physical capital, that investment in infrastructure and the like, human capital, the skills and the abilities of the people in the region, social capital, very important in terms of that community, sense of community and community cohesion and community activity. And as a rural region, a natural capital and our natural environment and the advantages and opportunities that brings us, and really focusing on those. In terms of supporting businesses, we support across a range of sectors, from the traditional, so tourism being a traditional rural sector, along with food, drink and agriculture, but equally important are sectors which are not typically rural sectors. Energy, I've mentioned oil and gas, and now renewable energy, both marine renewables and wind power. We have a significant life science sector. We also have significant numbers of businesses in financial services and creative industries. And I think the point here is that provides a breadth of opportunity for people. Not everybody from a rural area wants to work the land or wants to go out on a fishing boat or wants to work in a traditional rural sector. You know, people want to be engineers, they want to work in IT, they want to work in the creative sector. So we recognize the benefit and the need to develop each of these sectors and provide that range of benefits for individuals. And we do that through a variety of means. We do provide financial support to businesses, and that's in recognition that there is a degree of market failure in that very often the investment required for a business to develop is greater in the Highlands and Islands than it is in maybe a more urban or a closer to a large population area, and the rewards perhaps in some cases are not as great, and there's a higher risk which needs to be almost supported by public investment. But we do much more today to support businesses develop their skills, their capabilities around leadership, around entrepreneurship, helping them to really identify those new opportunities for their business. A strong focus around innovation in terms of new products, new business models, and a very strong focus as well around internationalization, and increasing those rewards to business investment through extending their markets. And much of that is around advice and support and signposting, and not about giving them money. I think the other area where we work very closely is around our support to communities, and in a sense, in some ways, this mirrors our support to businesses, in that we work hand in hand with communities to really understand them, their aspirations and their needs, and then support their development either through financial intervention of our own, or more frequently through helping them to access funding from other sources. This is an example I've used with Spanish audiences before, actually, and it's a community in the Outer Hebrides, and the community came together and purchased the land that they lived on from the landowner of the time. They did that with public money. There is a Scottish Land Fund which supports the purchase of land by communities. So the land was purchased using that fund, and then a package of support was put together to help the community invest in their land. And what you see in front of you in the photograph there is it's called Talon, which translates, it's a Gaelic term, but it translates as centre by the sea, and it includes business space, it includes cafe, restaurant, an event space, and what you can't see in the photograph there are some houses, which are family houses, a campsite, and some renewable energy generation. So there's wind turbines there as well. And that package of investment is designed to help that community then develop. They have revenue generating assets, and then they can invest the revenue from those assets in further community development. The aspiration being that their community grows from, I think at the time it was around 70 people in the community, and no children or very few children. And now that community is a community of around 150 people, including a number of families with children. So it's a very positive example of how investment is made to support the development of a community in a far-flung and remote part of the region. Takes significant public funds to do this, so it's not, it's sometimes not an easy option. And I think it's probably worth noting as well that alongside that financial investment, we do a lot of work with communities to help them develop their kind of capacity and capability to take on projects like this, to manage projects like this, and to wisely use the revenue that these projects generate. So really building that community capacity and confidence to allow them to take these projects forward. And I'm always struck by a comment that somebody made when they visited the region, and they were contrasting the communities that they'd seen in the Highlands and Islands, Scotland, with those in their own part of the world, and they were really amazed that the communities were not there saying to the public authorities, "We've got problems. What are you going to do to fix them?" They were saying, "We know we have problems that we need to deal with. This is what we would like to do about them. How can you help us to address these problems?" So they were really quite proactive and quite positive about them having the answers themselves and not looking to an external organization to provide the answers. They just needed the support. I want to talk a little bit about some of the infrastructure as well. As an organization, we have a small remit for infrastructure, and it largely focuses around business infrastructure. But really important in population terms is that wider infrastructure, whether it be transport or whether it be housing or whether it be academic infrastructure. And our role in that is really to influence others to make the right investments. So for example, in terms of transport, we work very closely with the Regional Transport Partnership and with the Scottish Government to ensure that transport investments are made that support that economic development, that community development. So I guess in that sense, we're providing our thinking and our expertise and our analysis to enable others to make those decisions and make those decisions around transport investment. But clearly in a region like the Highlands and Islands, transport is incredibly important, both for people and for goods. I want to talk a little bit about education as well. It's been mentioned earlier on today the challenges of education provision in rural areas, particularly those where populations are either sparse or declining. It's something that we've seen as a critical need, and we have supported significant investment in that. largely in the further and higher education sphere. So we work very closely with others in the establishment of the University of the Highlands and Islands. And that university came into being in 2011. It's quite an unusual setup in that it has 15 constituent colleges across the whole region, and interspersed between those are a number of learning centres. So it means that anybody anywhere in the region is very close to a further or higher education facility. That is supplemented by a high degree of online delivery of courses. And what that means is that young people no longer have to leave the region for an education. They can if they wish, and many of them still choose to do so, but some of them choose to stay at home and they can go and do their degree and get their education just as others going away would. And there have been a number of significant investments. The photographs you see there, the top one, there's the Inverness campus, which is the largest of the university campuses, and the specialist marine science facilities, which are down in Argyll. So again, dispersed across the region and providing real opportunity for education and for highly skilled work in research and the like. We've heard a lot today about digital infrastructure and its importance in enabling activity in rural areas. There's been a lot of investment in this in the Highlands and Islands, and there is ongoing investment, and the Scottish Government commitment that everybody, every business and every household by the end of next year will have access to super fast broadband speeds, so broadband speeds of 30 megabits or greater. So that investment continues, and that's a recognition that it really does reduce the impact of distance and allows, a range of economic activity, a diversity of economic activity, as well as its importance in delivering and accessing public services. So all of these areas of activity are ongoing, and they all have an impact on, I suppose, the attractiveness of the region as a place to live and work and do business. They all enable opportunities for individuals to find different types of work, to pursue their career aspirations, to access training and support as they need. They're really important in terms of an ability to access public services, which, over the distances that we have, can be challenging. So, and they have largely over the last 20 years or so, in population terms, population has continued to rise, and that rise is slowing. We're not immune to the pressures and the attractions, as every other rural area is, of large urban centres and a tendency for drift away from remote rural areas towards urban centres. We're not immune to that. I think we've done quite a good job of making the region an attractive place to live and work and do business, and mitigated those pressures to a degree, but those pressures still exist. And I now want to just have a look at the current situation in terms of population and some of our thoughts and some of the potential responses. So lots of numbers on the table, but I really want just to share with you some of these numbers, which you'll see some pluses and minuses here. And what that really tells us is within a region where population has been growing and is growing ever so slightly, or maybe stabilized is probably the right term for it. There are some areas where there is a greater population challenge. So if we look at areas like the Outer Hebrides, Argyll and Bute, and Caithness and Sutherland, so that's up the west coast largely and along the top of the mainland, there are clearly issues around reducing populations in those areas. Other parts of the region, population continues to rise. So there is variation across the region. And overall, you'll see that the Highlands and Islands population increase is slight and lower than Scotland as a whole, and that's reflective of those pressures that all rural areas are facing. If you look at the projections, you look at this and you think, oh my goodness, this is really challenging. So the projections show population decreases in Outer Hebrides, Argyll and Bute, Shetland and Orkney, a modest increase in Highland and a significant increase in Murray. And I think what that does for us is basically says very clearly, no matter what we have done up to now and how successful our policies have been up to now, this is clearly the job isn't complete and there is much still to do. I do take heart that we have generally outperformed projections in the past. So these are only projections, and I think our challenge is to put in place policy interventions that mean that these projections are inaccurate and the situation doesn't develop in this way. Just want to share this with you as well, and this is so we're looking here at dependency ratios, so the ratio of working age population to non-working age population. And again, you can see in those projections a significant, there has been significant increase between 2011 and 2018 and projected significant increase up to 2041. So this really does tell us that, you know, the job isn't done yet, and we need to continue and maybe enhance our approach to population issues. I just want to share very briefly with you, I'm conscious of time here, very briefly with you a little information about young people. And we recognize young people as really key to our population challenges. For many years, young people would leave school, they would go away to university and develop a career, and they would not come back to the region for, you know, if at all, until later in life. There was a prevailing attitude amongst young people that to be successful, you had to leave the region. That seems to have changed. Oh, there's something missing from that slide, I think. Sorry about that. But our latest research around young people was actually very positive. That central statistic there, 69% of young people feel that those who are able to stay in the region are lucky to be able to do that. So young people really value being able to stay in the region. A majority of young people really want to stay in the region. And there's a great deal of pride in where they come from. So real positivity. So no longer is it seen as you have to move away to be successful. There's a real pride in where they come from. But at the same time, young people recognize that they have to make compromises in certain aspects of their life to live in the region. And I guess our job is to reduce the level of those compromises, and you can see them there. So compromises around the difficulty and the expense of transport, fewer job opportunities, particularly fewer career choices. People don't want to have a job and then have to move away for the next job. So career progression. The university and college offer, still a challenge, but getting better given the existence of the University of the Highlands and Islands. So I think that's very interesting from a young people point of view, because it really does flag up some of the issues that we have to deal with, and some of the things that young people want to see addressed if they're going to stay in the region. I just wanted to focus very briefly, look into the future and look at some of the influences on population retention and attraction. And I guess there are a couple of big macro influences, if you like. Brexit. I rarely get through a presentation these days without mentioning Brexit, but given that 5 of the 6 worst hit areas of Scotland by Brexit are in the Highlands and Islands. So in terms of local authorities, 5 of the 6 local authorities that will be hardest hit by Brexit are in the Highlands and Islands. And that's reflective of the amount of EU funding that comes to the region, the economic makeup, in that there's lots of agriculture, there's lots of food and drink, which will be severely impacted by Brexit, and quite a number of businesses with migrant work populations. And we have a significant number of overseas migrants living in the area. So that will, and the issues around Brexit will challenge us in terms of addressing population issues. The second big influence, obviously, is COVID. And I think, as was said earlier on today, it is too early to tell exactly what the impact will be. Our analysis tells us that the Highlands and Island economy will be slower to recover than the Scottish economy as a whole, largely as a result of it has particular strength in food and drink and tourism, which are the 2 sectors that have been most affected by COVID. So that kind of recovery from COVID might be long and slow. I suppose the flip side of that is that we are seeing increased interest in people looking to move out of urban areas to rural areas. What we don't yet understand is that to the extent of people looking to move to quite a remote rural area, or are they looking to move maybe an hour or so from a city? And will it manifest itself in purchase of second homes and people can flip from a city location to a rural location, or will it be a full relocation from city to rural? We don't know yet. There may be some opportunities around that we need to explore, but it's not yet clear. And then regional influences on population retention and attraction. There's a very clear link with relative economic opportunities. If people are to live in a region, they need to make a living in the region. So they want work, they want career, they want to be able to access education without moving away. Connectivity is clearly a key, physical and increasingly digital. So continued investment in that is required. Housing is a really big issue, especially for young people. Sometimes young people move away because their choice is stay living at home or move out to the region because there isn't housing locally for them. And it's an area that we seek to influence. We don't have a direct remit to provide housing, but we seek to influence those who do. And the other influence, which is almost a softer influence, it's around culture and heritage and community and pride in community, being active in your community, and that real sense of being part of a vibrant community, which is incredibly strong in the Highlands and Islands, and certainly is attractive both to those people looking to return and those who are looking for a new opportunity and a new experience. So in terms of our place-based responses, we will continue that kind of capital investment and economic development approaches, so focusing on developing those opportunities, those enabling investments and the like, recognizing that we need to tailor that and intensify in certain areas, those areas up the west coast and the north. We will continue our strategic focus around young people, because in our young people we have a population of people who we know value their connections to the region and are looking for opportunities to live and work in the region. Building the social infrastructure, enhancing that is incredibly important. Building that community confidence, capability and capacity. And I think on top of that, we will need to consider the development and promotion of specific migration policies. We haven't done a great deal of that hitherto, but we maybe need to look at that in the future. And all of that, I would say, is part of a multi-agency partnership approach. We don't do it as an organisation ourselves. We work with the local authorities, we work with community groups, we work with business organisations, we work with Scottish Government and the like. So it's a real partnership, and we need to align and grasp those synergies from national policy responses. And at a national level, it's quite heartening to see that the Scottish Government has a population and migration task force established. They're looking at developing a more detailed understanding of population trends, and they are in fact adding some population indicators to their national performance framework that drives public funding and public investment. So there is a recognition at government level of the importance of these population issues. And there is a national programme it's not just about talent attraction, but it's about promoting Scotland as a place to live, work, study, visit, etc., etc. And if you go to the Scotland.org website, you will all want to come to Scotland when we're through COVID and you're allowed to do so, I can guarantee it. So a few very quick conclusions. If we go back 50 years, the catalyst for action was a real crisis. Something had to change, and something did change. I think throughout those 55 years now, being ambitious and taking risks has been a hallmark of what we have done, alongside that broad approach to regional development, business, community, people and infrastructure, and not just looking at traditional rural sectors, but looking at a broad-based rural economy. The organisation being rooted in communities and really understanding those communities, incredibly important. Strong and effective partnership working, as I've mentioned, we can't do it on our own. We need to influence others to act alongside us. And the last one there, which the numbers very clearly show, is that this work is not complete. The pressures on population drift to urban centres continue, and we have to continue being creative and focused in addressing those challenges and trying to mitigate those. And that concludes my presentation. I'm very happy. I've spoken for slightly longer than I had planned, so we maybe don't have too much time for questions, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Por mi parte, Rob, casi te agradezco que te hayas extendido porque ha sido un planteamiento excelente y como tú no has podido ver el chat, pero bueno, ha despertado muchísimo interés todo lo que estás planteando. Antes de pasar a uno de tus mayores fans, que es Miguel, solo dos razonamientos. Lo que estáis haciendo aparentemente podría ser una cuestión de dinero, que habéis tenido dinero por el petróleo, la pesca y demás, y que en la agencia manejáis mucho dinero. Yo he puesto ahí unos datos que he localizado, que en el año manejabais unos 80 millones de euros, pero más allá del dinero, que es muy importante, lo que me gustaría destacar, no es una pregunta, es un comentario para pasar a las preguntas, es que, ¿qué habéis hecho con ese dinero? Y que es parte de las preguntas que planteamos en el seminario. ¿Qué hacemos y cómo lo hacemos, ¿no? Y entonces me gustaría destacar que buena parte de ese dinero lo estáis invirtiendo en talento. Talento en creación de capacidades, en creación de emprendimiento, en ayuda al emprendimiento, que habéis seleccionado como un colectivo estratégico los jóvenes, que estáis consiguiendo que el 70% ya no quieran marcharse, que estáis consiguiendo crear oportunidades para que esos jóvenes puedan hacer cosas en el territorio, que estáis generando una infraestructura social, un capital social que es un factor de arraigo fundamental. Y solo te haría una pregunta y ya paso a Miguel. Uno de los ponentes de mañana, él ocupa un cargo en la administración regional en Aragón, hace una pregunta muy interesante. Y Salvador, José Manuel, perdón, me corrige si no es así. Yo venía a plantear cuál es el vínculo que tenéis con la administración pública regional o nacional y hasta qué punto hay solapamiento entre lo que hacéis vosotros y lo que puedan hacer las administraciones públicas. Yo intuyo por dónde va tu respuesta, pero me gustaría, si te parece, que contestases a esta cuestión y avanzamos. Muchas gracias.
Javier, I'm kind of hoping that wasn't a very long question for me because I haven't been getting any English translation.
Sí, los técnicos, es que en el canal inglés se escucha el inglés y el español.
Right, I can hear the English now. I wasn't hearing it up until 10 seconds ago, I'm afraid. I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, right, I'm on the English. I've clicked on the English channel and I'm not hearing any English, I'm afraid.
I think there was a technical problem, whereby the Spanish interpretation was going through the English channel, and not the opposite. So just to switch from one to the other and try to find the best questions if possible.
Okay. I can hear you in English now, yes. Okay.
Repito la pregunta.
Okay.
Muy brevemente. Uno de los panelistas, que es responsable del gobierno regional, pero yo estoy escuchando también el inglés, aunque estoy en el canal. Eso me obliga a ir más despacio, pero bueno, hago la pregunta. José Manuel plantea este margen de maniobra tan importante que tenéis en la agencia, ¿hasta qué punto se produce un solapamiento con la administración pública regional o nacional en vuestras acciones y en sus acciones?
We tend to work in close collaboration with local government and the local authorities. So in terms of our economic development function, local authorities do not do a great deal of business support. Now they used to, but as their budgets have contracted, they've done less. So in terms of business support and business development, there is little or no overlap. They do some work with very small businesses. We tend to work with more established and larger businesses. So there's a There's a relatively clear split between what we do and what they do. There's quite a degree of collaboration between us and local authorities around community support. And we do have regional mechanisms in place to align and ensure that what we collectively do doesn't overlap and fits together. We're probably not always successful in that, and sometimes there is overlap. But generally the relationships are quite positive.
De acuerdo. Bueno, muchas gracias. Pues paso la palabra a Miguel. Un panel importante que tienes en la sala. Miguel, muy brevemente, estamos ya fuera de tiempo.
Okay, I will. I hope that I think it's much better that I speak in English. If that's easier for you, Rob.
Yes, that's good. That's good, Miguel.
Okay, well, the chat is brimming with questions and comments. And but mostly many of them could be summarized. And what makes your agency a success? Because
what makes it a success?
You face the same challenges in many aspects, and you also have a past story of failures in developing the Highlands previous to the creation of your agency.
Yeah, I think the key success factors are the remit that we have, because many agencies they're either business development agencies or they're community support agencies, and they don't have the breadth of remit that we have. So I think that breadth of remit is very important, so we can support business, we can support community, because you can't have one without the other. So that would be one thing. I think a further strength is that we have always been seen as a very strong advocate for our region. So we're a very strong voice for our region. So although we are an agency of government, we will happily tell government when they've got it wrong or when we think they should be doing something different. So we understand our region, we know what the region needs, and we're very vocal in telling government and others what that is. I think a third factor is the fact that we are part of the communities, business and social communities that we serve. We are rooted in those communities. We have that devolved structure, so we have locations across the whole of the Highlands and Islands. So I suppose that gives us a strong motivation to develop the region, and it also gives us a very strong understanding of the businesses and communities that we work with. And in terms of location, we're very close to those people that we need to collaborate with. So I suppose those are three very clear strengths, I think, that we have as an agency. And I think if we go back to the beginning of the organization, I think a further strength was the flexibility that the organization was given at the outset. So back in the mid-60s, when the organization was established, and for quite a long time afterwards, the government view was, you know your region better than we do, you know what will work, what will not work, and therefore you make the decisions about what the interventions should be and what the support should be. It's probably a little less like that now than it was, and there's probably a degree more guidance, shall we say, from government. I'm choosing my words carefully here, but certainly in the early days, that flexibility and the trust that government gave the organization to do what was best for the region, I think was a real strength.
Okay, thanks, Rob. We are running out of time, and I need to make the last question for your intervention, which I appreciate very much. What's your relation to the local action groups, and if they in some way are integrated in your action plans for the development of the Highlands and Islands?
We have, in terms of our local offices, then each of the local action groups usually has a representative from Highlands and Islands Enterprise sitting on that local action group. In some cases, the local action group is chaired by a staff member of Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Well, certainly in one case, I think that's in Shetland. So we're involved. We generally sit as a member of the local action group and make our views known through that mechanism. Beyond that, we don't work really closely with the local action groups. A lot of their activity sits alongside ours. So we tend not to support the same organizations in the same kind of ways. So it's almost a parallel relationship. But I suppose the link is the fact that we are part of those local action groups, so we understand what they're looking to do, how they're looking to do it, and we can provide our views and an organization's view on that. So in terms of the management and the decision making of those groups, we're part of that.
So no overlapping with them in any way?
I'm sure there is some overlapping with them. I'm sure we would like everything to be perfectly aligned and perfectly matched. But I think there probably is some overlapping. Yes, I'm quite sure there will be. We're not perfect, Miguel.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, pleasure.
So I look forward to meeting you again.
Indeed, it's been a while. Thank you.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. Rob, thank you very much. There are some other questions that you agree to write in the chat, and you may continue the discussion through the chat. Okay?
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent. Por lo tanto,